Reluctant Entrepreneur Tarot. I'm Diane Ideas, Master Certified Coach, and this video takes you behind the scenes for card 13, Closure. So as you look at the Closure card, it's one of the darker cards. Yes, there's a path. It's a path leading somewhere, but the path is unknown, and it's obviously kind of winter. It's darker. If you think this about winter, the trees have dropped their leaves. They're conserving. They're kind of hunkering down. Spring will come, but there's some cold and some death before that regeneration. With the leaf, you see the decay, the kind of potentially even frost and decay. You also see, though, the with the stem of the leaf, you see the core and the backbone. So I think what's interesting is if you think about the closure card, you think about something ending. There's that darkness, that winter, that season. There's likely that mourning and grief associated with closure, especially because in tarot, closure is associated with the death card. It's also a path. It's also a path forward. It's a path where you don't necessarily know where it's going. If you look down the path and to the left, like the clouds are a little bit more light. There's a little bit more light on the horizon, so to speak, and you keep going. It's not a place where you kind of lay down and die, so to speak, and don't move beyond that. But it can be a dark and challenging road. So as we think about closure, the phoenix must burn to emerge. And I think the challenge here is that, we associate phoenix, we associate the phoenix with rebirth, but there is that actual burning and there is the actual death of the phoenix before it emerges. And so closure, as I've already indicated, relates to the death card in tarot. So the death card, like all of the tarot cards, is full of symbolism. What's interesting though is you have the kind of laying down and dying. The people on the card indicate that, no one is safe from kind of death and taxes. What's interesting though is that you see in the background of the card, there is that element of light, and it could be easy to assume that the light is the sunset, kind of, that it's dark and night is coming. But actually, because that's in the east of the card, that's actually the sunrise, even though those columns are associated with the moon card. So the death has its own darkness and challenge, the ending of a relationship, the ending of a business, the ending of a product line, the ending of your life as you knew it or a relationship as you knew it. But there's and that sounds extreme. So death rarely means the actual death of a person, but death of something significant. It's the end of the cycle. The caterpillar becomes the butterfly. So in some ways, that transformation, though, is a kind of death of the caterpillar. But in this card as well, we have the sun coming up on the horizon and the idea that this is part of regeneration. So Rachel Pollack in 78 Degrees of Wisdom says if we can accept death, we will be able to live more fully. And this is really part of the gift of this card, is that even though this is one that can kind of, like be a wince or a challenge, especially if you're hanging on to something that you don't really want to end, the idea of that closure or that death is that that thing needs to fall away. It's like the leaves on the tree. Those need to fall away. That season has ended. There will be a season that follows, and there is that path forward, but it's not what it was. So closure, as we look at it in the tarot deck, there's a relationship with the cards that precede it, and then also there's a complexity with the cards that follow it. So in Identity or the Hermit, we've stepped off the path to look within and really cultivate that wisdom, that internal wisdom. From that, seeing the patterns. How are our patterns serving us? How are they not serving us? As above, so below. What's happening underground and how does that impact what's happening above ground? Then the executive dashboard is that neutral, calculating focus on justice. How does that, what serves and what doesn't? What decisions are you making? That kind of intellectualizing of you've gathered the information, you've looked at the patterns, you're looking at what is in your control or what's kind of fate versus free will, and then what decisions will you make moving forward? The reluctant entrepreneur card then is that kind of waiting. The hanged man is the waiting or the standing still. It's almost like percolating. So as we see it and you think about the butterfly metaphor, If the hanged man, or in this case, the reluctant entrepreneur, is the cocoon, then the closure is the death of the caterpillar. So we know that that butterfly is coming. It's part of the cycle. It's part of the seasons. But as we think about this from a business perspective, as you've looked within and made decisions, because if you've looked within and made decisions that will impact you and your life and your business and really critically examine that, more than likely there's some things that will carry forward and there will some things that are close or end. So this is not a bad card. It can be a painful card because death is associated with grief and mourning and loss, but it's an important part of the cycle. Moving forward, this marks a more challenging part of the deck. There's actually an author that calls these the shitty cards. So this is a more kind of challenging season. You have what's called the big three. So the first of that is death, which is closure. We get a little bit of a break with temperance, which is balance. This is where we're reminded like we're on the right path. There's that balance. Then the devil comes in with doubt. And the tower, which I think is one of the most intense and most challenging card, where anything that wasn't, there's an author that talks about anything that wasn't burned away in death then comes crumbling down for the tower. And then that eases up a little bit as we get into the star with self-care. So I realize I'm intermixing a lot of kind of tarot language as well as business language here. So check out other videos on these individual cards if you haven't. But the idea of this, the big three, or kind of the darker three, closure, doubt, and failure, which in tarot are death, devil, and tower. This is a difficult season. This is a season that if you don't keep progressing, you get a little bit of a break on the balance card, and then you move into self-care, and then the cycle is soon to be complete. You know, success is only a couple cards away. But at the same time, if you're in one of these places, closure, doubt, or failure, and you don't realize that this is a natural evolution or part of the cycle, where you really have to look at what isn't meant to continue. How are your vices or habits not serving you? You know, are your foundations strong enough to hold you? And if your foundations aren't strong enough to hold you, that they'll be burned away. All of that is part of transformation, but transformation is not necessarily a cakewalk. And so this can be a very difficult season in the tarot path. And I'll say for me, in kind of experiencing, you know, closure, especially a lot in this last year, where clients' budgets were cut, or there were clients who retired or were retired and it wasn't their call. There were relationships or people that passed away. So there was a lot of closure in this last year. So mourning that and taking space for that and not letting it move into the doubt where it's maybe hanging on to the things that aren't serving us, or the failure where it gets taken away because we haven't accepted what's moving on. So these cards don't necessarily show up in order like they do in the Fool's Journey of Tarot, or in this case, the Entrepreneur's Journey. But at the same time, for those of you who are interested in learning more about tarot or familiar with tarot, I just offer this up so you can see the cycle. So a little bit more about the closure card. Questions to consider. What endings do you need to mourn or accept? And so just even really taking space to acknowledge that and making space for the feelings and not just trying to power through. Because if something is ending, you know, that's something that at least for a season has served you or supported you. So that there's a way that we need to mourn those losses. What are you learning from closure? You know, what have you learned? What can you learn? Like what doors might be opening once you move through it? How are you being asked to transform? So that in the spirit of the phoenix must burn to emerge, like what are you emerging to? Don't get stuck only in the burn and only in the death of it, because there's that part of that sunrise, that light, you know, moving towards something. What other doors and windows might be open or unlocked? So what I find in my own life is sometimes it's very difficult if the doors close before the windows open, but recognizing that this is part of the cycle, it's part of the season. You know, we do see winter before we see spring. There's no skipping over winter. That's part of it. If you'd like to listen more, we talk about closure on season 4 of Cross Street Coaching, episode 16. About the first half of the episode is about drive, which is associated with the chariot card in this deck. And then the second half is related to closure. Like what happens when that drive ends, when that drive and that passion either aren't successful or you decide to go another way. And the song for this is Luke Combs' Going, Going, Gone. So appropriately a heartbreak song. Good things come and then they go, like a runaway southbound train. You know, he talks about all these temporary things. It was like she was made for moving on. I can say it wasn't meant to be, but maybe meant to be is misunderstood. I can't hold on to letting go to change the way the river flows. It's like she was made for moving on. That girl is going, going, gone. So the sense of, mourning what is no longer the same and mourning that loss, but then also that understanding. There's a lot of metaphors in this song. Arizona desert rain, lightning in the sky, fireworks in July, left field home run ball, whiskey shot at last call. There's all these things and potentially kind of celebrations or significant events, but then at the same time, in this case the girl, or in this case the season, is closing and moving on. So if you'd like to learn more, check us out on Instagram at Reluctant Tarot, or check out reluctantentrepreneur.tarot.com, where you can watch the video, read the descriptions, the questions, the podcast, and find different ways to work with us. So wishing you well, especially if you are in this season of closure. It's an important part of the season and it's an important part of the cycle, but it can definitely be a painful one. So thinking of you and wishing you well, and looking forward to supporting whatever transformations come next for you.